Hello there RPG lovers and welcome to another video. Indiana Jones games have been around since 1982, with around 28 video games adaptations across various gaming platforms. Indiana Jones is certainly one of the biggest movie-based video game franchises. When the brand new game called The Great Circle got announced, I really wanted to go back and play all similar action-adventure Indiana Jones games.
Okay, buddy, it's your funeral.
This style of Indiana Jones game started in 1999 when Infernal Machine came out, and it continued with The Emperor's Tomb in 2003, Staff of Kings in 2009, and finally we got The Great Circle in 2024. We also had some LEGO Indiana Jones games, which I consider as a totally different series. The last LEGO game also released in 2009, so it's been a while since we got a proper Indiana Jones game. In this video, I'm going to cover 4 Indiana Jones action adventures, along with the newest title in the series, The Great Circle. I figured that would be the best way to approach the newest title and try to compare it with similar games that came before it, so I could hopefully get more appreciation for this game franchise. I played all of these games recently and I want to share my experience with you.
Well, I'm just here to serve God. Aren't we all?
So sit back, grab some drinks, and let me tell you about my time with Indiana Jones action adventures.
Some people just love the sound of their own voice.
Right after the sponsor of this video, Kawabanga. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have arrived in Hero Wars. Thanks to an epic collaboration between Paramount Pictures and Nexters, your favorite heroes in a half shell are joining the world of Dominion. And trust me, this is way more than just a new character drop, it's an all-out adventure you don't wanna miss. Get ready to dive into thrilling battles alongside the Turtles. From December 2nd to December 21st, Hero Wars is running a special event featuring the Ninja Turtles. Discover their journey into Dominion, unlock their secrets, and fight alongside these iconic heroes. Don't miss your chance to bring the Turtles into your squad for free. Yeah, you heard it right. The Ninja Turtles can be yours without spending a single penny. But that's not all. Be on the lookout for incredible limited time offers, including exclusive Shredder and Casey Jones skins that will power up your heroes like never before. With a boatload of bonuses and unique rewards waiting for you, this is the event that you've been waiting for. Act fast because time is running out. Once the event wraps up, the Turtles will not be available to be obtained anymore, so don't wait. Mark your calendars, rally your friends and join in. You can jump into the action however you like. Download Hero Wars on your mobile for adventure on the go on iOS and Android, or play it right in your browser on the next tab. This is one adventure you don't want to miss.
The Tian Shan Range straddles the border between China and Kazakhstan. The name translates as Heavenly Mountains.
Kazakhstan? Last time I looked, that was Soviet territory.
Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine came out in 1999 on PC, Nintendo 64 and Game Boy Color. I tried the Steam version first, but I had a lot of problems setting up the game to work properly on my PC. I installed some patches and did some tweaks so the game can support the wide resolution, but that would completely screw up the scaling of the UI elements. I also couldn't get the controller to work properly, even though the game supports it. Then I tried the GOG version, which pretty much works out of the box. I was able to play in 4K resolution and the scaling of UI elements was perfect. My Xbox controller works out of the box with the GOG version, which was not the case with Steam. Anyway, as soon as you open the game you jump into action and take control of the famous archaeologist.
Time to go to work.
You are immediately greeted with one of the worst control schemes ever. Moving Indy around feels like you're driving a tank. Now look, we could say that this game is a product of its own time, but then again, the bad control scheme was the main critique even back then. For some reason, the default option for moving Indy around is the extremely slow walking speed. I can't even imagine why they thought this should be the default option, but luckily you can easily change this in the option menu by selecting running for default speeds. This makes the control scheme a little bit better, but it still takes time to get used to how Indy moves and performs actions. Speaking of which, you have to be very close to interactable objects in order to perform specific actions. For example, you have to walk backwards a little bit when you want to start descending on a ladder. Same goes for grabbing a ladder on the wall, you need to be uncomfortably close to the wall until you can grab it. Using the whip is the same, you have to be exactly where the game wants you to be, as well as for the rafts on the 3rd level and so on, you get the picture. On the other side, you can easily dodge with a press of a button, which kinda took me by surprise, although I rarely use this mechanic anyway. After hearing what I have to say about the control scheme, you would probably assume that shooting mechanics are bad in this game, but they're not. It's pretty easy to shoot enemies with your gun or a rifle by just pointing the camera in the general direction of the enemy. The problem can occur when you're trying to aim at enemies that are not on your level. You can't control the aiming camera manually, so aiming up and down is pretty much impossible, but you need to be close enough to the enemy, I guess, so that Indy can do it automatically. All weapons felt almost exactly the same in this game, but like I said, you won't get to do a ton of shooting. Once you pick up all of the guns from enemies, the next time you start looting them, you'll only get ammo. Like I said, you won't get to do a ton of shooting in this game because it's mostly based around platforming and puzzles. That being said, you can control the camera manually out of combat, which can help you with figuring out what you need to do on the level. Indy can jump, grab ledges, go prone, use the whip at certain places on the map, shoot some guns, and use different items like first aid kits. Some levels have specific items to use, like the raft on the 3rd level. Speaking of which, this has to be one of the worst levels in the whole game. Up to this point, you're probably still getting used to the controls, and you have to use the raft, which has even worse controls. Controlling this damn thing was a real pain in the ass, and to make things even worse, you have to keep repairing the raft because it gets damaged on pointy rocks. Just before this level, you were learning how to swim, but now all of a sudden you'll instantly die if you try to get in the water because the game wants you to use the stupid rafts. Swimming mechanics get reintroduced on later levels, while the stupid raft does not, fortunately. To put it simply, the Infernal machine has a very slow and methodical approach to the gameplay in general, and the control scheme is a big reason for that. The thing is, it can be very annoying when you start playing, but it becomes fun to try and master this control scheme, at least it was for me. It's basically like a mini game that you have to constantly play. I mean, sure, it can be very frustrating sometimes when Indy doesn't do the thing you want. Playing old games like this will make you appreciate some small convenient mechanics in newer games, which we take for granted nowadays. However, I would take the clunky controls and a great game design over great controls and bad game design any day of the week. That being said, once you get accustomed to the wonky control scheme, you're going to realize that Infernal Machine is a great action adventure. I rambled a lot about the control scheme because I want you to know what you're getting into if you decide to check this game out today. It can be a major turn off for a lot of people, but like I said, if you get over that, you're going to experience an amazing action adventure. When you finish the level, you'll get a chance to get some useful supplies. You'll need to find items on the previous level that you can use as a currency in order to buy new supplies before the level begins. You'll be fine even if you don't do this, because all levels have more than enough items you'll ever need. I enjoyed the platforming and puzzles in this game, which progressively get harder but never too hard. If you don't like doing puzzles in action adventures, you're probably not going to like this game in general. I think these levels have an amazing visual variety as well, and it keeps the game interesting throughout the whole playthrough. More importantly, the level design itself has a lot of thought put into it. It forces you to use all mechanics you learn throughout the game, like pushing and pulling stuff, climbing, using your brain a little bit, and so on. It's pretty good. And it never holds your hand, although you can turn on some hints that will appear on the map if you get stuck. The story is also pretty good, with some decent characters and charming voice acting. I mean, it's a 1999 action adventure, so don't expect some award-winning voice acting performances, but it has a certain charm to it for sure.
Товарищи, stay alert. The Americanians may already be here. He's a smart one, that fellow.
The story is set in 1947, when Indiana Jones goes back to his digging career after his involvement in World War II. Sophia Hapgood, an old friend of Jones and a member of the CIA, visits him at a dig site to tell him that Russians are excavating the ruins of Babylon. Their plan is to find a weapon more powerful than the nuclear bomb, and you need to learn what exactly are they searching for. The story remains interesting throughout the whole game, but you won't get to see a ton of dialogue and NPCs. But whenever it happened, I enjoyed these little interactions, and the low quality audio just makes it even better somehow. Overall, I would recommend this game only if you have a high tolerance for clunky controls.
Okay, buddy, it's your funeral.
And if you're a huge fan of Indiana Jones, you should definitely check it out. Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb came out in 2003 for Xbox, PC and PlayStation 2. I was very curious to try this game out and see how it compares to Infernal Machine. You have to do some manual tweaks in order to get the game running properly in 60 FPS and ultra wide screen resolution if that's what you're using on your PC. But after that, the game runs flawlessly on modern PCs, at least it did for me. Anyway, this game is almost exactly what I expected from a sequel. Almost.
Reminds me of my last date.
It has a much improved gameplay in general, in terms of controls, combat, and the overall feel of the gameplay. Just like in Infernal Machine, you jump right into action. First of all, I have to say that I keep forgetting that this was a 2003 game, because it looks at least a bit younger. Every level has a nice and unique look, and you won't feel like you're playing a 2003 game on very high resolutions, unless you zoom in on the indie's face or stare in the distance. More importantly, the controls in this game are way better. Moving Indy around is much snappier, and you get to feel like you're playing a somewhat modern game, which was not the case in Infernal Machine. You can move the camera around with no limitations, and interacting with objects is almost seamless now. It's still far from perfect, and you're going to have some frustrating moments on platforming segments, but it's a night and day difference compared to Infernal Machine. I mean, that's a low bar to set, but it's worth mentioning. The camera will sometimes have a mind of its own, especially in tight corners. It's not so common, so it's not a huge deal. As you progress through this beginning level, which I really like by the way, you start learning about pretty much all basic mechanics and features of the game. A lot of those mechanics are very similar to the previous game, like the ability to grab ledges, use the whip, swim, fight and so on. However, there are some very nice quality of life improvements. Now the game shows you what and when you can interact with objects with a button in the upper right side of the screen. For example, the whip now has more interactable mechanics in and out of combats. You have to hold the left mouse button to keep swinging and release it when the time is right. Same goes for climbing chains and ropes. You have to swing indie with W and S buttons and press space when the time is right. Sometimes you need to do it multiple times in a row, and if you fail, you go back straight to the beginning of the level, which sucks. Speaking of which, one of the biggest flaws of this game is the lack of the save button. For some stupid reason, you can't save the game whenever you want, which boggles my mind. That's because Infernal Machine came out in 1999 and you could save the game whenever you wanted, so there is no excuse for this. It just makes the experience way worse for absolutely no reason. The difficulty picks up after about 4 or 5 levels, and there are some challenging segments which can definitely get you killed. I'm mostly talking about enemy encounters, but platforming segments can also get you killed sometimes, especially if you don't pay attention or press the wrong button at the wrong time. It feels so punishing just because you go back to the beginning of the level. There are 10 levels in total in this game, but all of them have sub-levels. So the game won't put you back to the first level, you go back to the last sub-level you started. It's a big flaw in this game, and I wouldn't be surprised if you don't want to play it because of it.
What? No more jokes.
That being said, I really enjoyed my time with the Emperor's Tomb. To go back to those new gameplay features, the whip has some proper combat uses now, which is pretty cool. You can hit enemies with it, which doesn't seem to do a lot of damage, but you also have some very useful moves. You can steal guns from enemies and pick them up from the floor. This is something that I really like, and it's very useful. You're constantly going to struggle with the ammo in this game, so being able to snatch the gun from the enemy's hands is a great addition to the gameplay. It doesn't work all the time on all enemies, but still. Enemies and indie will drop their weapons upon getting hit, which is a bit annoying sometimes, but I think it gives the combat a nice dynamic. Dynamic which lacked in the previous game quite a bit. Enemy AI is pretty decent actually. I like how they're able to pick up the gun from the floor and some other objects to use in combat, like the chairs. Once again, if you have the weapon you're picking up you only get the ammo, which is all you need basically. Very early in the game you also get an automatic weapon, which is not all that great to be honest. You have to be very close to the enemy and waste quite a bit of bullets to kill them instead of shooting them with a gun 2 or 3 times. The guns feel a bit better now, but not by much. When you shoot or get shot, it's like punching instead of shooting, that's how it feels to me. You have these silly animations, but some of them are pretty cool, like when you're fist fighting. I mean, fist fighting in this game can feel a bit random and it can get chaotic against multiple enemies, but it's okay in general. You can grab enemies by pressing both mouse buttons, but they can also do the same to you. I really like the physics system in this game because you can use it to your advantage. Enemies will fall from the ledge when you attack them, but the same can happen to you. I mean, we can take this for granted nowadays, but we had so much games in the past with some invisible walls and ledges, which prevented you and the enemy from falling, and I always thought that was very immersion breaking.
I don't suppose they have an elevator.
Holding shift is a big deal in combat. It target locks the enemy, and it allows you to use a little step dodge, which works pretty good most of the time, and you sometimes end up behind enemies' back. If you have a gun, holding shift is pretty much essential for target locking. When there are multiple enemies, aiming can be a bit clumsy if you want to aim at a specific enemy, but that's usually not a big deal. You can also use aim from the first person perspective now, and the game tries to tell you that headshots are a big deal, but they are not really. You should focus more on guns or getting the ammo you need from the enemy, instead of trying to fight everyone with your fists. Picking up random objects to use in fight is cool, but I rarely did this. You will need to do this in some quote-unquote boss fights, but those fights are very gimmicky in general. They're not bad, but they require you to do something specific instead of being an actual fight. What I can't seem to understand is how the hell swimming got so much worse compared to the previous game. There are a lot of swimming segments in this game, and some of them have a very nice design, but controlling Indy in water is just terrible. You have to use the space to propel yourself forward, while using the mouse will move you up or down. Trust me, it's much worse than it sounds. When it comes to the level design, this is where the game took a noticeable step down. I mean, the level design is not bad in general, I think it's okay, but it's definitely streamlined. The objectives are very simple, and going through some of these platforming segments is a bit boring and not challenging at all. To be fair, the challenge in the previous game was from the wonky control scheme, but still, it felt more enjoyable. Partly because of the struggle with the controls, but mostly because of the great level design in general. To give the level design some credit, there is a very nice variety of things you need to do. You will rarely repeat the same mechanic on these levels, excluding the whipping around and grabbing on ledges. While the previous game had some optional items to get, which are supposed to make you feel like an actual treasure-seeking daredevil, this game almost totally disregards that part of the gameplay. There are no idols or gems or anything of that nature to find, but then again, the item store from the first game is gone as well, so you can't buy anything before the mission starts, like before. The story also took a step down if you ask me, even though the presentation is obviously much better. I enjoyed the cutscenes, which are few and far between, but I didn't really care about what's going on, to be honest. Overall, I really enjoyed this game, despite all of its issues. I would recommend trying it out if you like action adventures in general, and especially if you like Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones and the Staff of the Kings came out in 2009 on PlayStation 2, Nintendo DS, PSP and Wii. Wait a moment, 2009? This game looks like it came out in 2001 at best.
Sticks and stones, as you Americans say.
Long story short, there was another version of the game that was being developed for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, but it was scrapped. All we got in the end was this version of the game, which just looks horrible, uninspired and really muddy. The textures are worse or on par with that 1999 game, which is just insane. I'm not even exaggerating, and this is the emulator version of the game with upscaling to 4K. Now, I'm not usually a guy who will ramble about bad graphics, but this is just unacceptable. I would be ready to tolerate low-res textures if the artistic style of the game was good, but it's not, it's far from that. What the hell happened to Indy's face, by the way? To make things even worse, his face looks like it had the most detail compared to regular NPC faces. Putting the visuals aside, maybe the gameplay is good. No, it's freaking terrible. Somebody said, hey, let's turn Indiana Jones into a bunch of quick-time bullshit events with on-rails shoot-through elements. Brilliant. I really wanted to give this game a fair chance, so I did play it for a couple of hours, but nope, I just couldn't take it anymore. But here's what I experienced in those couple of hours. Once again, you take control of Indy and immediately start learning about the gameplay. The controls are much worse compared to the previous game. Moving Indy around feels very stiff, but the controls are serviceable considering what the gameplay requires of the player, which is not much at all. You start learning about basic mechanics like the whip, which has similar functionality like before. But now you also use it for pulling stuff in and out of combat, which would be fine if the rest of the gameplay was compelling. Shortly after this, you begin fighting some Nazis in order to learn about the melee combat. To be fair, the fist fighting combat is quite possibly a bit better than before, but this combat system is just way too exploitable to be fun. You can easily grab enemies and interact with the environment to finish them off. It's kinda funny sometimes, which makes it slightly more fun, but I got bored of it even after a couple of hours. You can dodge attacks, which instantly triggers a counter-attack, or charge a regular attack for more damage. You can do the same with objects you pick up, which are plenty. This combat system would be okay if the rest of the game wasn't a huge piece of shit. Instead of giving you guns and letting you shoot people, this game decided to have scripted on-rails shooting scenarios, or whatever you wanna call it. No matter how you call this, it's just absolutely terrible. You have to do exactly what the game expects of you, so it's not like you get a lot of choice here. For example, you can't just shoot this guy, you have to shoot the environment instead and repeat it a couple of times. It's so fucking stupid. Every now and then you have to do this bullshit quick time event, and if you fail, you go back to the beginning of the level. Yeah, this game is exactly the same like the Emperor's Tomb when it comes to the save games. The thing is, that game didn't suck a dick like this game, so I had way more patience.
Reminds me of my last date.
I mean, the levels in this game are much shorter, so it won't take a lot of time to go back where you died, but that doesn't make it any better. Speaking of levels, the platforming is almost not worth mentioning at all. It's extremely basic and devoid of any fun. It's nowhere near the previous game or the game before that, which had a very thought-provoking level design. You will just go through motion on these uninspired levels, do some melee fighting and shooting, along with a lot of quick time events. I was so disappointed with this game, and I wanted to go back and replay the Emperor's Tomb to forget about it. Luckily for me, I didn't have to do that because The Great Circle just came out shortly after I was done with this game.
Looks like company.
Adesso ti stendo!
How'd you like that?
Colpo pezzente!
Indiana Jones and the Great Circle came out on 9th December on PC and Xbox. I played the Xbox Series X version, which was much better than I expected, and it looks freaking amazing. Every location is filled with visual details, the characters look great, and the same can be said about animations. To make things even better, I don't believe I saw a single frame drop in the game during my playthrough, except in some transitions between cutscenes and the gameplay. But then again, even the cutscenes run in 60 FPS. You will explore the city of Vatican, Egypt, the mountains of Himalayas, Thailand, and so on. All of these locations have a great visual variety, and it keeps the game looking fresh throughout the whole playthrough. This game is very heavy on the story, so you're going to look at these characters from up close a lot. Their faces are very detailed, and they have a lot of different facial expressions, especially Indy. Other characters are very well done as well, especially the bad guys. I mean, the moment you first see them in the game, you just wanna punch them in the face.
Danke für Ihre Mitarbeit.
Arrivederci.
The Great Circle pays homage to previous Indiana Jones games by not wasting any time on intro cutscenes. You begin playing the game straight away, but this time around from the first-person perspective. That's a big elephant in the room, especially if you just completed previous Indiana Jones games, because all of them had a third-person perspective. I'm not a huge fan of the first-person camera in action adventures or RPGs, simply because this perspective puts a lot of limitations on character animations and gameplay in general. That's not even a subjective opinion, it's a straight-up fact. Speaking of facts, the first-person perspective is undoubtedly the most immersive camera mode you can have in the game, and Indiana Jones tries to be a very immersive game. Fortunately, the Great Circle is very successful on this field, because there are a bunch of other features which complement the immersion. The gameplay has a very methodical approach to all mechanics. Even the simple action of opening some locked doors requires you to press up to 3 buttons. That might sound annoying to some people, but when done right, it can definitely increase the sense of immersion and your connection to the game world. Instead of just playing a cutscene for some of the segments where you present the items you find for the quest, the game makes you press a couple of buttons to interact with objects. Climbing, jumping and whipping around no longer has that arcadey feel. These sections are much slower and more realistic this time around. Indy is constantly grunting and seemingly having a hard time, and for the second there, I thought I'm watching Harrison Ford in his 80s instead of young Indiana Jones.
Be careful.
I know what I'm doing.
I mean, that's not a critique, it's just different from what we experienced so far in older games. Like I said, all of this makes sense for creating an immersive experience. These features could easily be annoying if the game itself was not done properly, but the Great Circle just keeps getting better as you play. The game doesn't lack cutscenes though, it's actually full of them, and for a good reason. This is definitely the heaviest story-driven Indiana Jones game, and the story is pretty good as well. It starts off with Indy waking up in the university after he had a dream about the forest that I mentioned before. That forest segment is actually a faithful recreation from one of the epic scenes in the movie. He investigates a noise and he finds a huge dude who stole an artifact from the museum, which opens up a big can of worms, and it puts the main story in motion. By the way, this dude looks very similar to Tony Todd, a great actor with many different roles. After this happened, Indy begins to search for the artifact in Vatican, cosplaying as a priest.
You're forgiven.
Father, wait, I didn't confess yet.
He eventually finds out that Nazis are collecting these artifacts for a specific reason, and obviously they are very bad people. In order for me to even care about bad guys in games, they need to be very well done, and the Great Circle did a great job of making me hate these people. Whenever I saw this guy and this guy on the screen, I just wanted to punch them in the face. Indy also has friends that you will meet, and my personal favorite was Father Antonio. His voice actor did an amazing job, and he's a very good character in general.
Are you sure you want to investigate this, Indy?
Look, things don't add up and it's driving me crazy. There's more to that cat mummy, and I'm not letting that giant off the hook.
Indy is voiced by Troy Baker, and he did a marvelous job with mimicking Harrison's Ford voice. I can't overstate how good of a job he did with this role.
Looks like the lost Nurgle clay idol of Edu. They say touching it summons a Sumerian death curse. If you believe that sort of thing.
Of course not.
There are some very funny moments as well, as you would expect, and the overall vibe of the story is a bit silly, but that's in the spirit of Indiana Jones movies. Indy spends a lot of time with Gina, who is searching for her sister. I think she's a good character as well, but maybe a bit overused in some segments. She will accompany Indy on a lot of missions and help him out here and there. This would be a lot more annoying if she was a bad character, but she's not. She's pretty good. The same can be said about pretty much all characters in the game. The dialogue and writing in the game are much better than I expected, to be honest. That being said, the game is not exactly what I personally expected. The Great Circle is a story-driven stealth action adventure, and a very good one at that, amazing even. So it's not exactly like previous action adventures that we talked about, which kinda makes me sad. I expected a bit more action-oriented gameplay, but instead we got a stealthy adventure game. I did enjoy the gameplay though, which is primarily stealth-oriented. I usually find stealth games a bit annoying, probably because I lack patience for such a gameplay style. However, the way that Indiana Jones does the stealth segments is not annoying at all, mostly because it's a little bit forgiving. I played the game on hard, and I never felt like these stealth segments were tedious or hard even. That's not only because of the stealth system itself, but because the game mixes up activities you're going to do quite a bit. Stealth mechanics are fairly simple, and it's nothing revolutionary. All enemies have a detection bar, which is easy to see. You can knock down an enemy that's very close to another NPC, and they won't get easily triggered. Only when they are pretty close or if you make a lot of noise. I breezed through a lot of the stealth segments, but even when you get caught, it's not that hard to knock down a couple of NPCs and run away and hide. Unless you pull the whole freaking map on yourself, which is pretty much game over. However, even in those extreme situations you can still make it, especially if you have a specific skill that you can get early on. You can crawl on the ground and get your hat, which magically brings Indy back to life, and it also resets NPC behavior. This skill saved me more than a couple of times, and it allowed me to keep progressing without reloading the game. Speaking of which, we have yet another Indiana Jones game that doesn't allow you to manually save the fucking game. To be honest, I didn't even feel the need for it in this game because the checkpoint system is very good. Indy will get different outfits to use as a disguise, but he also has its own authentic outfits. What I found a bit annoying is the gun, which for some reason can only be selected when you go back to Indy's outfits. You can get weapons from enemies as well, but Indy's revolver is always in your inventory. The problem is, you can't select it while wearing another disguise. However, even this design decision feels intentional. That's because I think they don't want you to use the gun a lot in the game, and even when you can, the ammo is extremely limited. Shooting feels good, but you won't get to use guns a lot in general, because it's very loud and you want to try and not pull the whole freaking map on yourself. You can certainly try to run and gun in some segments, but the game clearly wants you to be stealthy. There are some heavily scripted scenes where you do a lot of shooting. All weapons in the game, melee and ranged, have a durability system. You can even use the gun as a melee weapon, but it will easily break, forcing you to use the repair kits. It's the same for melee weapons in the game, which are plenty. You can pick up various objects to use as a weapon, and the melee combat itself is pretty decent. There are a lot of different animations that Indy can do, which will take enemies out. The whip can be effectively used in combat again, which makes me happy. The punches feel impactful, and you can take down NPCs with a couple of strong hits.
Là, trovato! Prendiamolo! Deve scappare!
Most of them at least. Some stronger big guys will be a bit tougher. You can also get killed easily in a fight if you relax too much. You can dodge with A button, parry, grab the NPC and finish them off, but it's always better to have a melee weapon on you. The durability system makes all weapons scrappy, even though they have different levels of durability, and you can improve that with some skills. But if you try to fight a couple of NPC at once, your weapon always breaks. It's very easy to find another one though, so it's not a huge issue. Enemies have a very silly, almost cartoonish animations when you knock them out, which can easily confuse you. I don't even know how many times I thought I have to hit the enemy a couple of more times, only to find out that's just animation they used for falling down. I would say this becomes pretty annoying sometimes because you can get caught while being loud. There is not a lot of enemy variety in the game though, which is quite possibly the biggest critique of this combat system. But then again, the combat itself is just one part of the gameplay, and when it happens, it's usually pretty satisfying, despite the lack of unique enemy types. You can manipulate the enemy AI easily by throwing objects around, like in most stealth games. But yeah, the game definitely doesn't want you to use guns that much, which is understandable. Outside of combat, we have a lot of platforming and puzzles, which are well done in general. I really enjoyed the platforming in the game, even though it's definitely a lot slower compared to previous games. But like I said, it only makes the game a lot more immersive in general, and I love immersion in games. I love good gameplay loops a little bit better, but I'm also a huge fan of an immersive design in games, which is something that the Great Circle excels at. The puzzle started a bit annoying, although I played the game on stream a little bit, which makes it a bit harder to focus on what I'm doing in the game. Yeah, that's a good excuse for being dumb. The difficulty of these puzzles never gets extremely hard, and you will need to use your brain just a little bit, or just brute force them with trial and error. The game does a great job with the presentation. The presentation will make some of these sections more intense than they actually are. Even though the game is in first person, some of the actions that Indy does will switch to third person, like climbing with your whip or interacting with some puzzle elements. That's one of the rare mechanics in the game that favor gameplay functionality over immersion. It would be even more immersive if the game stays in first person perspective even in these segments, but it's much easier to see where you need to climb or drop in third person camera. Vatican feels like the biggest open level in the game. Maybe that's because Vatican has a more vertical exploration because you're exploring the ground and the roofs. Indy has a camera that he can use to discover clues and secrets, which gives him more XP. You will use this experience to unlock new skills from the books you need to buy or find. I love how the map in the game is being held by Indy when you open it, and it's yet another feature which focuses on immersion. I mean, sure, you have a magical arrow on the map for quests, but even the 1999 game had something similar. Overall, I love this game, even though it's not exactly what I expected.
Oh, mind feeding Osiris, Dr. Jones?
I don't think he's hungry.
Scared of snakes, Dr. Jones?
Must be a problem in your line of work.
It's very easy to recommend if you enjoy story-driven action adventures with a beginner-friendly stealth system. And that will be it for Indiana Jones action adventures. I will have some GOG affiliate links for some of these games if you want to get them on that platform. I really enjoyed revisiting some of these classic Indiana Jones games, and fortunately, the newest game didn't disappoint.
Well, I'm just here to serve God.
Even though it stepped away from the arcadey gameplay that previous Indiana Jones games were known for. Anyway, tell me about your experience with Indiana Jones games. Did you play any of these games, and which one is your favorite? Leave a comment down below. Once again, huge thanks to Hero Wars for sponsoring the video. Make sure to check it out by clicking on the link in the description. If you enjoyed the video, leaving a like and subscribing would mean a lot. I'm getting very close to 100k subscribers, which is insane, and I still can't believe it. Massive thanks to all of my channel members and Patreons, and if you want to support the channel like the people you see on the screen, you can find all the links down below. That will be all, and I'll see you in the next one.